Welcome to What's the Scenario with PLRB, where we explore claims and coverage scenarios relevant to insurance professionals. I'm Alicia Watley.
I'm Mike Broad.
I'm Tim Havler.
And I'm Brennan McLaughlin, Education Counsel at PLRB.
Yay,
And producer of PLRB. What's the Scenario with PLRB? All right, Brennan, I get to ask you this again. Are you ready?
Ready.
All right, Brennan, what's the scenario?
All right. It's a typical night at the downtown Speakeasy. There's jazz in the air, and the moonshine is reasonably priced.
Yeah.
Maybe too reasonably priced, because a few of the Speakeasy's patrons are getting belligerent. The bartender nods at the bouncer, who calmly asks the loudest patron to leave. The gentleman declines the bouncer's request, first verbally and then with fisticuffs. Soon, half the bar has joined the fight, and the bouncer is on his way to defend a waiter when he finds himself in a chokehold. Well, the night ends early when the bouncer flips his assailant to the ground. The year, 2020. The place, rural Indiana. The issue, whether the Speakeasy's assault and battery endorsement limit applies.
Well, first off, I got to ask a question here, Brendan, even before we start. We're talking moonshine and jazz in rural Indiana? Come on now.
You know, that was one of the really interesting things about this. This scenario is based on a real case, and it was at a speakeasy, and it kind of sounds like it could have happened in like the 1820s in the heart of Chicago, but it was rural Indiana, and just recently too. Has anybody ever been to like a speakeasy? Like a modern one?
If I did, I would be able to tell you.
It's true.
Yeah, I've been to a tavern, bar, I don't know. Aren't speakeasies technically supposed to be illegal places where you secure adult beverages?
What's the difference?
Back in the day,
Well,
yes, you had to have secret locations and secret codes, and
the passcode.
that could be the case today. There are a couple of places like that, but speakeasy, it's more of a vibe than an actual underground where to get your hooch during Prohibition.
Gotcha.
Well, we actually, my wife and I, we were in, I think, Minneapolis for whatever reason. And it was literally underground. And it was the kind of thing that doesn't like exist on the internet. You have to hear about it word of mouth. You go down an alley, so there's no sign. You knock on an unmarked door. You give the password, and then you head down. And it's like it's a really great restaurant. But yeah, you have to be in the know. So if we ever do a conference in Minneapolis, I'll have to clue you into that.
Yeah.
Well, no wonder I've never been to any of these, because if it's not on the internet, then I probably don't know about it.
See, the problem is,
find out about
I'm not
it,
cool
the problem
enough.
is Brennan talks too much. Not everybody knows. Great, Brennan.
Oh, I didn't say where in Minneapolis. Good luck.
Too much.
Yeah.
How'd you figure it out, Brendan? How'd you find out about this place?
Don't you tell him.
I don't know.
That may or may not actually exist.
I don't remember now. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So
I can't tell. I'll never tell.
Good. So we have fisticuffs in rural Indiana, like that word. What is the legal situation during this melee?
Yeah, so the situation we're talking about is we have the injured patron, the one who actually started the chokehold, is actually suing the speakeasy. And it's arguing that the speakeasy has more money to settle the case than the speakeasy says. They're arguing that the speakeasy's insurer has up to the general policy limit of $1 million to get it settled. The insurer is arguing that this situation falls under the assault and battery endorsement, and the assault and battery endorsement has a limit of only $25,000.
So there's really an endorsement for assault and battery? I think that's new to me. What's that all about?
Right? Yeah, that can't be, I don't know how much it costs to add that one on, but it says, we will pay on your behalf all sums which you shall become legally obligated to pay as damages because of injury arising out of assault and or battery. Right? So, even if your employee commits an assault or battery, they're going to defend you for that. But only if the injury, A, takes place at designated premises, and B, occurs during the policy period. So there is that on-premises thing that last week our fighter stepped off premises. This time you got to be on the premises. There's also a part that says we will have the right and duty to defend any suit against you seeking such damages, but we shall not be obligated to pay any claim or judgment or defend the suit after the applicable limit of liability shown in the endorsement has been exhausted. So it is strictly limited to that $25,000, which is not what the injured patron wants to hear.
Well, they'll start none, won't be none.
Mess around and find out, as I've heard through the internet stuff. So even with this here cool endorsement, and I'm sorry, Tim, I'm like stealing the whole conversation, but this case has got me interested. So generally there's like that expected or intended injury exclusion that would apply to your normal cases. So that wouldn't apply here with our cool new endorsement.
Yeah, there's a lot of ease involved here. But this exclusion, it's a totally separate part of the policy from the endorsement. They're not related directly. The expected or intended injury exclusion does exclude injury that's expected or intended from the standpoint of the insured. Now, if you throw someone into a table, you probably expect them to be injured.
I would think.
But there's an exception to the exclusion. Lots of ease. There's lots of ease here. Exception to the exclusion. It doesn't apply to bodily injury resulting from the use of reasonable force to protect persons or property. And the bouncer testified that he did not intend to injure the patron, but only to get whoever was on him off of him.
Again, what you doing a chokehold on the bouncer for?
Right. Good point.
Accountability? What?
So, Brennan, it sounds like the patron is arguing for the $1 million in coverage rather than the amount that was much less than that was limited by the endorsement. What would be their argument for up to the $1 million under the main policy?
Well, the idea is that the injuries slot neatly into this expected or intended injury exclusion, which is part of the general policy. The default 1 million limit would apply, and the expected or intended injury exclusion would typically, exclude this kind of behavior. But then it's got that self-defense exception to the exclusion, and this behavior is so specifically, identified there and slots so nicely there that you would think that it applies. Meanwhile, the fact that you have another endorsement out there doing something similar, the patron says that the existence of these two things creates an ambiguity. Well, there's an ambiguity. They resolve the ambiguity against the drafter being the insurance company. So if there's an ambiguity, the patron would theoretically take that point.
I think, too, if you look at it, the endorsements for assault and battery, and even the bouncers not claiming he did any assault or battery. It was a pure self-defense move to get this person off of his back. So the intent was to defend himself, not assault somebody purposely. So maybe that's another argument too, that endorsement really shouldn't apply because it wasn't technically assault or battery. It was self-defense.
And did the patron succeed on that argument in this case?
No. This scenario is based on Scottsdale Insurance Company versus Speakeasy Bar and Grill. And that court found that the exception to the exclusion did exactly what it says right there. It just means that coverage is not excluded. Nothing more. So other parts of the policy could still apply to limit or exclude that type of injury or that situation. But just the fact that there is an exclusion, an exception to an exclusion, doesn't mean that other parts of the policy can't relate to that same thing.
So it's kind of like the endorsement took precedence over the policy and limited it to the $25,000. Is that what the court kind of leaned on?
Yeah, the court found that the endorsement could apply because it wasn't in any way inconsistent with the self-defense exception. It wasn't impacted by that.
But then getting to my point there where we were kind of talking about this wasn't an assault or battery because there was no intent to hurt the person, just to get them off of them in self-defense. So, I want that $1 million again, Brennan.
Yeah, and that's what the patron says. Kind of a funny argument. So they're arguing that, hey, the person who hurt me didn't mean to hurt me, and therefore it's not an assault, a battery, without that intent. And if it wasn't an assault or battery, you're not limited to that $25,000. So kind of an interesting position for that patron, arguing, oh, he didn't mean to hurt me. And to prove that, the injured patron cited a case where the patron, there was let's say, a guest at another establishment, another time, another place, and that patron got so inebriated, the bartender cut him off and kicked him out for stealing other people's drinks. And this guest kept coming in, kept trying to get back into the bar. So the bartender pulled out a pistol, intending just to show it off as a warning, not intending to pull the trigger, but it went off anyway and shot that guest.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. But unlike that earlier case, where the person didn't even intend to pull the trigger, in here there's no ambiguity. That the bartender intended to perform the action that caused the injury, intended to pull that person off of them and throw them. Therefore, the actions arose out of assault and battery, and the limit applies.
The $25,000 limit applies.
$25,000 limit applies, yes.
That's all you get. All right, so Brennan, what can we take away from this scenario?
Don't drink and fight.
Yeah.
Oh.
That's always a good, takeaway.
Thank you, Alicia.
Mm-hmm. Well, here the court found there was no ambiguity just because two clauses with two different limits touched on the same issue. If the policy had included an assault and battery exclusion and a self-defense exception to the expected or intended injury exclusion, the courts would be more likely to find that policy ambiguous, maybe. But here, the assault and battery exclusion can apply where the offending party didn't intend harm, but they did intend the action that caused the harm.
And Mike, where can an adjuster go to learn more?
Well, first, subscribe to our newsletter, Frontlines, because I believe this case was profiled there, so you would have read all about it there. But of course, you can research anything at plrb.org. Plenty of great stuff under the general policy or the commercial general policy annotations. Under expected and intended injuries, there's court cases out there and coverage questions on does expected or intended exclusion apply to employer for the employee's assault, just like in this case. You can find it. So lots of cool stuff at plrb.org that folks can check out. And Alicia, will you add those to the show notes?
Of course. I can add those to the show notes. I can add a recap of the key points from this episode to the show notes. I can also add links to our social media. And we also have information on how to submit your own adjuster story. So don't forget to subscribe and rate us, and we'll see you next time.
Yay. Bye, everybody.
The views and opinions expressed in this resource are those of the individual speaker and not necessarily those of the Property and Liability Resource Bureau, its membership, or any organization with which the presenter is employed or affiliated. The information, ideas, and opinions are presented as information only and not as legal advice or offers of representation. Individual policy language and state laws vary, and listeners should rely on guidance from their companies and counsel as appropriate.